It's a pleasure, of course, to introduce Andrew Berman. You already know Andrew because of the last review, and you know also your way to reasoning about architecture. But we will meet again him in Friday, and we are very happy. We asked to Andrew to do a kind of short lecture. We are working a lot, and the time is always few. But we think that it was good to have the occasion to see a short lecture for Andrew. So we asked him to present to us just one project, a single project. I would like to say a few things to introduce Andrew Berman. Starting from his formation as an architect, Andrew studied arts at the Yale College and then received a master of architectural degree in architecture from Yale University School of Architecture in 1988. He opened his own firm in New York in 1999, and he received during his career many awards, starting from the Emerging Voice Award by the Architectural League of New York. He became fellow of the American Institute of Architects in 2014, and also received in 2016 the Architectural Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Between many of his projects and building, we remind you to some that you can also find in magazine, and especially in the magazine, also in the magazine, in the Italian magazine Casabella, like the Center for Architecture by the American Institute of Architects, the Writing Studio, beautiful building, the MoMA PS1 entrance building, the Stepton Library, and the Vatican Chapels in occasion of the Biennale di Venezia in 2018. And also the Sculpture Center in Brooklyn, that is the building Andrew Berman is going to present to us. I would like to add some consideration about the features of his work, starting from the relationship with the site. I think we saw this kind of attitude to work in relationship with the site in the first review Andrew did in our workshop. And this kind of relationship as something that seems to me and to the scholars that drawn about his work as something peculiar that belongs to a kind of attention to the morphological aspect of the context, but also to the cultural aspect, to a relationship that is also personal, that involve culture, social elements, personal point of view. I remember a lecture, maybe someone of you already saw this lecture of Andrew Berman some years ago in MANTOVARCHITETTURA, in which the starting point was a kind of description of the site of some of his project, starting from the distance from between the studio of Andrew and the site of the project. And it was, I think, a way to introduce this attitude to look at the site like something that involve the architects between different subjects of the project. I would like also to add another element to this, that is the feature of the architecture that derives to this attitude to look at the site. That is, of course, an architecture not ideological, but we can say in dialogue with the subject, the site, with the elements that are involved in the project. And I think in this sense, in dialogue means also an architecture that doesn't want to radically reinvent the site, but want to reinterpret the site and want to become part of the context. I can almost finish, maybe adding that this kind of research that Andrew was developing in the years seemed to us a kind of researching with the term quiet is present. And this quiet research is something that I think is very interesting and precious for all of us. And also is something that has to do with our work in Sabbionetta, that is, in this sense, the site for a quiet research in architecture. I'm very happy to have, and me and all the professors here and all the students, we are very happy to have Andrew with us. And I give the floor to Andrew.
Thank you, Angelo. Thank you for a very kind introduction. And I'm pleased that you used the word dialogue. I hope that the presentation today will bear that out further. So today I'm going to show you, as Angelo said, a single project. It's a sculpture studio, which we designed for a sculptor. And it is located in Brooklyn, New York. And the title of this talk is Waste and Retrieval. And I'm going to pause for a minute as the siren goes by. At the 2005 Biennale in Venice, the American painter Edward Ruscha presented a series of paintings titled The Course of Empire. The paintings are ruminations on American power, culture, and the landscape. At the Biennale, he showed 5 pairs of such paintings. Each pair described the same place. The first is in black and white. The second painting in color. Time has passed between each painting. This painting, the pair to the preceding, is titled The Expansion of the Old Tires Building. The preceding painting was titled Blue Collar Tires, blue collar being an American colloquialism for the working class. There are 13 years between the two paintings. And as I said, the paintings were shown at the Biennale. They were laid out at the American Pavilion in a very interesting arrangement that engaged the space, engaged in neoclassical architecture, and played upon the issue of symmetry within the building and within the tradition of American art, or classical art, we can say. Now, I show this because I saw these paintings in New York City in late 2005, immediately after they were shown at the Biennale. And their deadpan presence made a very strong impression. The paintings are large, they're very beautiful in their painting and in how they're just rendered. And they provoke very interesting questions of beauty, of value, and of what lays behind the surface, behind the story. They speak of what Ruscha has called waste and retrieval in reference to his own work. The title of the series, In Course of Empire, references Thomas Cole's 19th century cycle of 5 paintings that are a rumination on the American empire and its potential demise. It is a cautionary tale Thomas Cole's 19th century series. This painting that's on the screen now is the first of the painting of the series. It's America as Arcadia. It's a rather blithe interpretation or rendering of America as the first white man arrived and essentially took stewardship of the continent from the people who had lived here previously. And this is the final painting from that same cycle in which the overreach of the empire has run its course. Cole is cautionary in his narrative. Edward Rouchet, on the other hand, has seen the fall in 2005 without any judgment, and one senses without much tears. He's just ready to observe, to move ahead, and to make things in the moment. Now, the client for the project I'll show today is named Barry X. Ball. Barry is a contemporary sculptor. He is an American. He was born and schooled in California, in Southern California, and then moved as a very young man to New York City, where he has continued his artistic practice to this day. Barry shows widely, internationally, and he shows quite a bit in Italy. The image on the screen is a photograph from a show of his at the Villa Panza in Varese, in Lombardia. This is a show of Barry's from the Ca' Pesaro in Venezia. And this photograph is of two of his sculptures in the Ca' Rezzonico, also in Venezia. This was a different show. Most recently in Italy, Barry has shown his reinterpretation of the Rondinini Pieta at the Castello Sforzesco in Milano. Now, Barry approached me to design a studio for him back in 2013. He had been living and working in Brooklyn and had been working in a very kind of ad hoc, piecemeal sort of environment. And he was interested in bringing everything together, his whole artistic practice, which includes quite a team of artist assistants, together into one place. He was in the process of purchasing land in a waterfront neighborhood called Greenpoint. It is a neighborhood that has long been zoned for manufacturing. Now, so on this map, as Angelo mentioned, you can see where our studio is. It's the red dot in Lower Manhattan at the left of the screen, and then where the site in Greenpoint is, which is the dot on the right. Very, very different landscapes, though we're very proximate to each other. Like most manufacturing areas, Greenpoint has long been in decline. The area is a mix of various size buildings, workshops, and lots. I'm going to show a few photographs from the neighborhoods so you can get a feel. Some of the manufacturing buildings are quite enormous, full block, as this one is. The materials and assembly of the neighborhood are of a vocabulary of economy and of pragmatism. Time and wear are very present. They kind of overlay everything here. Lovely patina and corrugated steel. And this is a view of the lot across the street from the site that Barry purchased. This particular site is a stone yard. And this photograph is the site before our work. The red brick face building in the middle distance came with the property, as did two lots in the foreground and a single lot beyond the red brick building. This is another view of the building and a view of the side of the building. So the building like many in New York, has a public face, red brick, and then even less costly side and rear treatments. The building was very simple, very crude. In fact, it was built expediently, very expediently as a warehouse. It had no heat. It was not particularly watertight. It really was the barest of shells of a building when purchased. The adjacent lots were used for storage and various unknown purposes. This was one of the lots where trucks were stored, and there's a concrete slab over the ground. The other lots were just dirt. And this is an elevational photograph that we stitched together at the time before we started the project, which shows the property in the 4 adjacent lots. We chose to work with 3 lots, which include the brick warehouse, and then the 2 lots to the left of that, which had street fences, but were empty lots at that time. The warehouse had been built, as I said, very simply, and it just was used for the storage of goods, like these canned, I think these were tomatoes. And this is a plan of that building as it was when we found it. So you can see here the plan of the building, and then the 3 lots, 2 to the left, 1 to the right. We started the project without any particular preconceptions of what to do and how to do it. This was a new undertaking for Barry. He had not had a kind of all-in-one studio before, and so he was used to working in a much more improvisational way that included workshops near and very far away. A lot of his work was being milled at the time in Italy. Some of it was being milled in Connecticut. Some of it was in New Jersey. I think some of it in other locations. He really wanted to bring it all within one place. As we worked on it, we considered what to do with the building. Do we include it? Do we remove it? What we concluded was to keep the building was not expedient in any manner. It was not a logical choice, but the building itself had some kind of intrinsic value. It represented a piece of the place, let's say. It's a typical building of this place, despite its sort of lack of inherent quality or character. And we kind of concluded that in addition to that, in a climate in which most development immediately destroys everything in the service of building new and building maximally, we thought there was an important value in the commitment to work with what was at hand. And so we chose to keep this building and go forward. But keeping it was not to particularly cherish it, nor to restore it to an original condition. It was a kind of raw material, if you will, a material of its place. And so we tried to think about it in a loose manner, a free manner, something that could be worked hard to find new utility and new life. Here you can see the beginning of the demolition of parts of the building. And this photograph was taken once the whole rear of the building was removed. In removing the rear of the building, it opened up new possibilities of fenestration. It allowed us to introduce some necessary structural reinforcement. And most importantly, we decided that the rear of the site here was more valuable as a courtyard than as a one-story structure. We very much wanted to be able to weave exterior spaces into the experience of the new studio. It takes time to work with old structures. And I think as a structure like this, which actually had kind of dubious value, it takes even more time to understand its value. But the time put into the building actually allowed us to kind of understand the building as something that was more supple than it had immediately appeared to us. And so we, I think, managed to find what the utility was and how to make the building yield to the specific needs of this project and the situation. When a building is built so marginally, so close to the bone, as we say, it is a more difficult endeavor to figure out how to bring it forward, but still possible. So here, construction's ongoing. This man is hand excavating to reach below the foundations. What we found in initial surveys that the building was built with inadequate foundations, and the building was built on top of garbage fill. It further reinforced that it would have been rational, perhaps, to demolish the building, but I think it would not have been the right choice, despite being rational in this case. So the site was mostly landfill. Landfill means it really was the accumulation of debris, garbage. And as we excavated, we found that there was an enormous amount of ash, dumped ash, which is the byproduct of wood and coal burning stoves, which were certainly used for heating and industry for the whole neighborhood. So presumably on the site was a big pile of ash that people brought daily over a couple centuries. By looking at old maps, we realized, and not just old maps, but actually the last major storm we had, which was Hurricane Sandy, we saw that water basically arrived back up to this building. So this building had originally been probably about at the edge of the shore, and everything between the building and the actual river, which is the East River, was probably marshland. So not good soil for building, hence its utilization as a neighborhood for manufacturing and dumps. So that's all to say that we had to do something about this. And what you can see in the foreground are wood piles, which had to be driven into the soil in order to make for a beginning of a suitable foundation base for the building. And here you can see the piles being pounded into the soil. In the background with the blue is a pile driver, and then the backhoe, this kind of crane, which is yellow, is used to further drive these piles down. And these piles create a foundation, if you will, a network to build upon. This was the same method of creating a foundation for the Vatican Chapel that we had built in Venice on the island of San Giorgio Maggiore. Smaller piles, but same basic ancient technique. And here in Brooklyn, on top of these giant timber piles, we poured a heavily reinforced slab, concrete slab. The slab was sized to both take the load of the equipment and the very heavy material that was going to be brought into the hall, and also to act as a kind of structural membrane for the new building. And then you can see here, the steel has started to be erected. This is the new building that we had designed to tie into the old building, which you can see in the background. And in the old building, you can start to see that we've started to create new openings in the sidewall. And this photo from roughly the same period shows the construction ongoing, in which the original brick and concrete block building is starting to be added onto with the new steel framing that is part of our new design. And here on the screen is the final plan. The warehouse is on the right. It has been absorbed into what is, I would call, a campus for the making of art. As I said, it's a place where Barry and his, what are about 12 or so assistants can work together in a maximalized, idealized workflow for Barry's process of making sculpture. There are outdoor spaces in the foreground. I don't know if you can see the cursor, but there's a courtyard along the street, and then there's a rear courtyard, which I mentioned earlier. And these courtyards play an important role in the workflow. And in this drawing, you can see the old building, which is finished in black paint on the right, onto which we added a series of structures. The street fence, which is running right along the sidewalk to the left of the old building, was designed to make a screen and to form an entry courtyard for stone storage and for exterior work. So here's a photograph of the finished project. The kind of conceptual strategy here was additive. We had something to work with, and the result is something of an assemblage, I would say, an assemblage in which there are discrete parts, and these discrete parts make a whole. And then this whole makes a kind of entity that naturally reforms or reconnects back to the qualities of the neighborhood. And in this view, you can see the various building forms, the various materials, and the various textures coming together. It's a sort of urban collage or assemblage. So the perforated fence that screens the entry courtyard from the street is what's on the screen now. And this fence makes a new facade in tandem with the existing brick facade of the warehouse that stretches along the whole street. And this perforated metal reads very much in contrast to the adjacent brick facade. The qualities of kind of hard and laid up exists in counterpoint to the kind of almost fabric-like quality of the perforated. And this was not just a material choice for its aesthetics, but it was a very critical decision to create a real palpable degree of transparency between the public and the private. We wanted to allow views in to see the materials, to see the work, and to see the activity in this place of fabrication. It's a real counterpoint to the quality of the similarly sized manufacturing buildings of the neighborhood in which everything is closed. Everything is really essentially a fortress, harboring what's in and separating it from what's outside. And beyond the screen fence is the stone yard. This is where Barry stores the stone he has sourced over the years. And as part of this, we designed the means for a 20-ton crane, which you can see in the background at the top of the courtyard. And this crane slides or rolls back and forth on tracks so that the stone can be offloaded from delivery trucks and be stored in the yard. Being able to store the stone on site is critical to allow Barry to work in a more fluid manner. The presence of the stone in the life of the studio, I think, is quite nourishing to the creative process. One is always aware of it. And it allows Barry to slowly watch his raw materials, to really be able to pick and choose with more feel and more immediacy as works of art are being planned. And ultimately to select the right stone for each piece of sculpture. So this is a photograph of a sculpture that was at Barry's studio when I was last there, which was about a week and a half ago. And back to the plan of the building. So the building, as I said, has allowed Barry and his team to have now an ideal workflow in which trucks can deliver stone, stone can be stored, stone can then be moved into the Fabrication Hall. And in addition to the great Fabrication Hall, which is the horizontally oriented rectangle at the left of the screen, there are many different types of workspaces, which I'm going to walk you through. So what was involved here, I'm not going to go into it in great depth, but was really an understanding of not just how Barry and his team were going to work, but an understanding of how Barry wanted to show his work, how the public would enter and visit the studio, how the artists that work with Barry would enter and work within the studio, how Barry and his family could enter and both work and live within the building. And so to do this, we created various different paths, various different divisions between public and private, many different divisions between clean and dirty, between digital and manual, between loud and quiet, between wet and dry. And very importantly, they were not just, the design is not just about the divisions, but it's about the overlap where all these things come together to allow people to work together and work in a very focused manner. So I'm going to go very quickly through how Barry works. Each sculpture starts with a 3D scan of the work or the subject that he is interested in. In this case, the scanning is of a sculpture by Bernini, which in English is the Sleeping Hermaphrodite. And here is Barry scanning Michelangelo's Rondinini Pieta in Milan. Barry also works from live models. So this was taken from a collector and gallerist in New York City, who was the subject of these sculptures. Each digital file is then downloaded and manipulated into the basis of the artwork that's being made. And from these digital files, initial prototypes are produced. And these prototypes are the kind of first evaluation of the three-dimensional sculptural form. And as they accrue, they populate the space, much like the raw materials in the stone yard do. The digital work is all done in clean spaces that we designed for the second floor of the studio complex. So you can see here a kind of meeting and file and presentation area. This is in the digital imaging area. This is in an area that is more library and gallery-like. This shows one of many skylights that we cut into the original warehouse in order to provide natural light for which to see the artwork. And this is a photograph of Barry's study. Barry has a window overlooking strategically the stone yard. Everything kind of comes back to the raw material. And then this photograph is showing what one sees when you arrive as a visitor to the second floor, or as an employee, as one of the artists who's coming upstairs to work digitally. The first thing you see is a window back into the Fabrication Hall and a piece of artwork. So here we are now in the Fabrication Hall. This is the big steel framed volume on the ground floor. The Fabrication Hall is where cutting of stone is done, cutting, milling, and working in many different ways. You can see here somebody hand working on a piece of stone, which is being supported by a 20-ton crane, which rolls on a gantry for the full length of the hall. After the stone is cut on a large wet saw, which is called a Pellegrini, the stone is then rough milled on a lathe and then further carved by water jet. The space is reminiscent of an industrial architecture, an architecture that would be familiar in the neighborhood, but it is conceived with very specific qualities in mind, and qualities and concerns really apropos to a contemporary art studio and a workspace. So natural light, ideal qualities of natural light were of major concern. And here you can see light coming in, both direct light from a northern clerestory and through diffused light in a more south and eastern facade. There's cross ventilation. There's a fluid connection between spaces and between the interior and the exterior. There was a real premium on flexibility, on comfort, and on high performance. We were cognizant of wanting this to be a very good place for people to work, as well as a good place to handle and see the materials and the final artwork. The ample size of the fabrication hall allows for a wide range of activities and projects. And in this view of the hall, you can see the doors are open to the stone yard, which is beyond. And in this photograph, which essentially the camera is half in the hall and half out in the stone yard, you can see the doors are open as well. The doors are 5 meters tall. They were sized to match the standard height of, or the maximal height of a tractor trailer truck, which can travel on interstate highways, so that the largest truck that can travel on a highway or go through a tunnel would be able to back up into the hall and offload stone either into the yard or into the fabrication hall. The doors also allow for the doors to be open, of course, during mild weather, like we're having this week in New York City. And it makes for a nice place to work. The space is generous. The generosity allows for flexibility. It allows for change, for different types of staging. And it has certainly allowed Barry to think about new types of projects and allowed him to start to work at different scales. I'm going to show you a very short video. It just moves you through the space. The doors are open on this day. So this is very typical. 3 or more people working on a single piece at any one time. So off the large fabrication hall, there are 4 day-lit workrooms. And in this photograph, there are actually 4 artists working on the Rondinini Pieta. And each of these smaller spaces are used for grinding, for sanding, for washing, for polishing, and for looking at finished work or near finished work in a controlled light. I'm not going to talk today about environmental concerns, but there were many: air filtration, water filtration, water reclamation. These industrial processes are very heavy on water usage, and everything is reused. The water is reused. The stone dust from the carving is all actually captured, compressed into bricks, and resold for industrial purposes. There's a photograph of another one of these small workrooms with this sleeping hermaphrodite in a polished pink marble. And it's being reviewed in a gallery-like installation for final finishing. As you would expect, there are a wide range of support spaces required for such a facility. This photograph is taken in the wood shop. It's adjacent to a metal shop. You are looking through a kind of storage area and then looking ultimately into the fabrication hall. All the spaces were designed so that it was very easy to move very large and very heavy materials and artwork all the way through the building, including into a very large elevator, which can bring materials and artwork upstairs. It's a photograph of the tools and supply area. It's very clean. is a photograph of a space that we designed for photography and for lighting mock-ups. So before artwork goes out, it is kind of mocked up within a gallery type environment to see, to make sure that there's a kind of synergy between the light and the piece. And then coming back outside and upstairs, this is a photograph taken at the roof level where we built a small structure. And this small structure allows for on-site living in a legal manner in what is a manufacturing district. So this is a roof plan showing the penthouse level in which there's a large room. Here you can see in the photograph. And this penthouse has a view of the planted roof beyond. It has wonderful views of both the immediate neighborhood of Brooklyn and the Manhattan skyline beyond that. And it is a lovely space as a counterpoint to the working spaces below. This is a view from the lawn outside the penthouse, and you can see over the railing, the stone yard down below, and you can see out to the neighborhood. The soil here at this roof level is about 1/2 meter deep. It's deep enough for planting of an orchard, which was the original intent and which I think will be coming in the future. Right now, it's just grass. And then there is another planted roof on top of the penthouse, which was worked out for more the planting of vegetables. This is a view over the parapet from the penthouse, looking down into the stone yard and then across the street and then actually further out towards Manhattan in the distance. And this is a view in which you can see the studio in the foreground with the 2 terraces of planted roofs. It's actual grass. It looks to me like it's Photoshop, but it's not. And you can see the building in the context of the manufacturing district. Lower Manhattan is at the top of the screen. That's the what's called the Freedom Tower, the World Trade Center, the highest building out there. That's across the East River. And so what you see here in the context of this aerial view is that the studio is both familiar, similarly scaled in many ways to its context, but it's also quite different. The studio brings new qualities, new potentials to the existing typologies of the workshops and warehouses. And the incorporation of environmental and occupational concerns provides the beginnings of a whole reinvention of this typology. The planting of the roofs, of course, is one such strong step towards moving the typology forward. Now, coming back down to the street level, this is what you see from the sidewalk from the street. And you can see into the building through the layers of the street fence and the interior walls. And as I mentioned before, it was a real deliberate decision to make this building transparent. It was, I believe, a generous gesture to share the inner life of a building with the neighborhood. The materials, the steel sections, the steel sheet, the corrugated and perforated steel and aluminum that was used to clad the building, and the polycarbonate sheets that also clad the Fabrication Hall cohere into a very considered palette. And it's a palette that rhymes very much with the local dialect. The geometry, the massing, the materials all help to engage the work of this project into a dialogue with the buildings in the neighborhood around it. And to Angelo's point from his introduction, this is really very, very, very fundamental to every project we undertake, that our work is in dialogue with its surroundings in ways both explicit and very much intrinsic. the local vernacular of utilitarian structures here has been transformed into something which is open, porous, light, and comfortable. It's stridently a good place to work, which was not a concern of those who built the first and previous generations of such buildings in the area. The building you see here is both close and quite far from its original typology. We worked to use a phrase by another American artist, Jasper Johns, with things that are things that the mind already knows. And this too is a kind of important concern to me, to work with things that we already have a feel for, understand. And it gives us an opportunity to have immediately a level of context, a degree of legibility, and an opportunity for the work to be in discussion with this larger environment. Barry and I were in agreement that this project was going to be a very strong statement about the viability of craft and also the viability of manufacturing, not just in the private realm of his studio, but that manufacturing could be viable within the context of a contemporary New York City neighborhood. So seeing something made with great care and consideration, I believe is increasingly rare. And as a piece of development within New York City, it certainly runs against the prevailing trends, which really are metriced more towards commercialization and maximization of profit. But as an architectural endeavor, I would like to think that the process of design here did indeed lead from waste to renewal. And as such, we have brought something natural back to its landscape. And so I'm going to end with that. And I would hope, or at least enjoy, to be able to answer any questions if anybody has any. Thank you very much.